Sorry for the long hiatus. I was actually writing a book. I've sold a couple screenplays. I bought a house. I've been starting a family, and this has just been on the back burners, but it does not mean that I don't want to continue. It just means that I had other things going on. So without further ado, I would like to continue with this series, if that's okay with you guys. The next place that I want to go is I have been reading a couple of books. The two books I have been reading are Project Serpo. I have been reading both the ones with the actual journal entries from the quote-unquote anonymous, and then I've read also the other one that is done for certain timeline evaluations to give you guys a little bit more of a accurate representation. I've also gone ahead and done a lot of research on my own time and tried to connect the dots to make it make sense a little bit more, because some people say certain things, some people say other things. Without further ado, I want to get started. So this episode in particular, I'm going to go into a lot of different topics, and then if you just continue to follow, I will start coming out with a couple short films here too that I'll be publishing on this channel that are mysterious or horror driven. And it's going to be kind of like Twilight Zone meets Black Mirror. So if you could just stick around, that'd be great. So today's episode is going to be focused on mainly Roswell, and just kind of some of the different details that have come out about that due to Project Serpo. So first, we'll start with Kenneth Arnold. So 60 plus years ago, there was a light aircraft flying over the Cascade Mountains in Washington State. It was around 10,000 feet above sea level. Visibility was claimed to be good, and as pilot Kenneth Arnold started scanning across the sky, he saw a group of 9 shiny metallic objects flying in formation overhead. He estimated their speed as being around 1,600 miles per hour, nearly 3 times faster than the top speed of any jet aircraft at that time. And then soon after he made his report, some reports came in all over the state of similar sightings. So this was the birth of the phenomenon that one still is called Roswell, New Mexico. This was the first report of the incident in 1947. And then military authorities issued a press release, which began, and I'll just read the press release here. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence officer of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc. So I don't know if you know anything about the 509th Bomb Group, but they're extremely selective about their members. If you are a part of their membership, you will have to be top of your class in a lot. So very credible witness there. The headline screamed, "Flying disc captured by the Air Force." Yet just 24 hours later, the military changed their story and claimed the object they'd first thought was a flying disc was a weather balloon that had crashed on a nearby ranch. Mac Brazel and Jesse Marcel are the first people at the crash site. Don Schmidt, Kevin Randall, Sam Friedman are the whistleblowers on this. Mac Brazel takes Marcel and another intelligence officer out to the crash site and says that the debris is not from Earth's origin and that he knew weather balloons. He described it as a tinfoil you can crumple up, but it retains its shape. These I-beams with purple hieroglyphic writings. He described the metal as being wafer thin, but incredibly tough. He said it was as light as balsa wood, but it couldn't be burned or cut. Lieutenant Walter Haught was the public relations officer at the base in 1947, and he was the man who issued the original and subsequent press releases after the crash on the orders of the base commander, Colonel William Blanchard. Haught died December 15, 2005, but left a sworn affidavit to be opened only after his death. You can actually listen to this whole deathbed confession if you want to. It's on Spotify. I'll link them in the description as well. It's a really good episode. I do highly recommend listening to it. It's a highly detailed and good timeline. I was going to try to quote some of the stuff from here, but it's just too hard because it doesn't really match with Project Serpo's timeline 100%. And that's not where we're going with this video. So the text was released and asserts that the weather balloon claim was a cover story and that the real object had been recovered by the military and stored in a hangar. It actually says that he showed it to his son. So his son was the only living member who wasn't a military member to see this metallic object or these materials. He does talk about them in some of his interviews. I'll also attach those in the description at the bottom. He described not just seeing just the craft, but alien bodies. He wasn't the first Roswell witness to talk about the alien bodies. Local undertaker Glenn Dennis had long claimed that he had been contacted by Roswell, New Mexico, shortly after the crash, and they asked him for 6 child-sized coffins. When he arrived at the base, he was apparently told by a nurse who disappeared shortly after that a UFO had crashed and that small humanoid extraterrestrials had been recovered. But House is the only one of the original participants to have claimed to see the bodies. Haught's affidavit talks about a high-level meeting he attended with Base Commander Colonel William Blanchard and the commander of the 8th Army Air Force, General Roger Ramey. Haught states that at this meeting, pieces of wreckage were handed around for participants to touch, with nobody able to identify the material. He says the press release was issued because locals were already aware of the crash site, but in fact, there had been a second crash site where more debris from the crash had fallen. The plan was that an announcement acknowledgement the first date, which had been discovered by a farmer who is called Mac Brazil, would divert attention from the second and more important location. Howe also spoke about a cleanup operation where for months afterwards military personnel scoured both crash sites, searching for all remaining pieces of debris, removing them and erasing all signs that anything unusual had occurred. This ties in with claims made by locals that debris collected as souvenirs was seized by the military. So that kind of aligns with a lot of the things that had been reported with the Roswell crash. This is nothing new, but these are deathbed confessions from this gentleman, so he didn't really have anything to gain, so I don't see why there would be any reason in lying, but at the same time, you never know people's intentions. Make up your mind for yourself, my friends. Haught then tells Colonel Blanchard took him to the building 84, one of the hangars at Roswell, and showed him the craft himself. He describes a metallic egg-like shaped thing that was about approximately 12 to 15 feet in length and 6 feet wide. He said he saw no windows, wings, or tail, landing gear, or any other feature at all. He saw 2 bodies on the floor, partially covered by a tarpaulin. They are described in his statement as about 4 feet tall, with disproportionately large heads. Towards the end of the affidavit, Haught concludes, "I'm convinced that what I personally observed was some kind of craft and its crew from outer space. What's particularly interesting about Walter Haught is that the many interviews he gave before his death, he played down his role and made no such claims. Had he spoke publicly, he probably surely would have spoken about the craft and the bodies. Did he fear ridicule, or was the affidavit a sort of deathbed confession for someone who had been part of a cover-up, but who had stayed loyal to the end?" So just to give you a little more information, Walter Haught actually on December 26, 2002 in Roswell, New Mexico is when he went ahead and released these documents to the notary. So he lived on West 7th Street, which is only 6 miles from Walker Air Force Base, where he once served as a public information officer for the 509th Bomb Squadron. Walter took a bus into town, making his way to the office of a local notary, Beverly Morgan. He pulls out several sheets of paper from a folder he brought along, handing them over to someone who is duty-bound to keep them under wraps until after his death. In 1939, Walter Haught was in the Air Force as a bombardier flying 35 successful missions over Japan. After the war, he shipped back home and was transferred to the Roswell Army Airfield Base as a secretary. The Ronald Reagan briefings were a briefing that the president undertook with a man named the caretaker The other person that was there, his name was William Casey. He was in the briefing room along with the caretaker. But the caretaker kind of leads the conversation. You can actually listen to the briefings. All right, so based on the Ronald Reagan briefings in March of 1981, so there was 2 crash sites. There were 5 dead aliens and 1 alive alien who was taken to Los Alamos laboratories. The 1 alive alien was considered to be called EBE-1. So at the outset, the caretaker revealed that all the debris and the EBEs recovered from the first crash site were taken to Roswell Army Airfield, Roswell, New Mexico. The EBE was treated for some minor injuries and then taken to Los Alamos National Laboratories, which was the safest and most secure location in the world. Special accommodations were made for EBE. And then some people say that this is the J-Rod that was tested by Dan Burrish, which if you hadn't seen that video yet, it's also linked in here. It's the only other video I have, so if you haven't seen it, I don't know. What are you doing? No, just joking. But the 2 I don't believe are connected because the timelines just don't match up. This alien or this entity died in 1952, and it wasn't until the 80s until Dan Burrish was even in Majestic 12. So I don't believe they are the same. But anyway, the EBE was traded for minor injuries. The debris was eventually transferred to Dayton, Ohio, which was home of the Air Force Foreign Technology Division. Second crash site wasn't discovered until 1949 by some ranchers, which we already talked about briefly. Mac Brazel, which I'll kind of get into, but not too much. If you really do want to listen to all that, they do get into it on Spotify. I do recommend listening to it. It's a very detailed timeline of the incident, but that is not why we're talking about this. We are just talking about this to kind of foreshadow what we're going into with Project Serpo. The NSC felt open disclosure could lead to a nationwide panic if all information about UFOs and alien visitation were released. As well, the caretaker explained that public awareness of ongoing research and exchange with captured aliens could seriously jeopardize the future space programs of the United States. EBE-1, or extraterrestrial biological entity, died in 1952, and we learned a great deal from EBE. It didn't have voice organs like humans, but it was able to communicate due to an operation performed by military doctors. EBE was extremely intelligent and learned English quickly, mainly by listening to the military personnel who were in charge of its care. Although many scientists and professionals studied EBE, it never became upset or angry. He even helped them learn about the items found at the 2 crash sites, showing how a communication device worked, among other technologies. It took the EBE spaceship 9 Earth months to travel 38.42 light years, which is faster than the speed of light. Apparently, their spaceships can travel through a form of space tunnels that get them from point A to point B faster than the speed of light. In 1953, we tried 3 times after his death to communicate with the EBEs, but did not receive any return messages. In 1964, we had our first controlled encounter with the EBEs. So this is after he had passed away. So EBE-1 passed away. He was trying to contact his people while he was still alive. He tried to send them 6 messages, which none of them got returned to. The first message was to let his planet know that he was alive and his comrades were dead. The second, which makes sense, the second message was another explaining the 2 crashes to his planet and what had happened. The third message was a request to be rescued. The fourth message suggested a meeting between their leaders and our leaders, our military leaders. The fifth message was was suggesting a secret exchange program. And then the 6th message contained landing coordinates for Earth if he was going to do the secret exchange program. But nobody had received word until 1964, after his passing. Go in a little bit of more detail about EBE-1. EBE-1 was a mechanic. He was, or part of the Air Force like NASA. He was not a scientist. He helped them to learn the language of the Ebens, which took on a more tonal form, like singing or screaming, as some would say, than words and sentences. And it was very hard to translate at first for our scientists. Going back in time a little bit, in 1955, we sent 2 messages that were received, and we understood about 30% of the messages. After assisting translation assistants from all over the globe, they were able to understand more of the message. They decided to reply in English to see if they could translate the language. The first message confirmed that the Ebens received our messages, the 6 of them, and asked questions about the crew of the 2 missing crafts. And it included some numbers that they think that we kind of think are coordinates or were coordinates, wanting to know where the crashes were on Earth. The second message, it was unknown, or we weren't able to translate it. I wasn't able to get information on that. But they decided to reply in English to see if they could translate our language easier than we could translate theirs. About 4 months later, we received a reply in broken English with nouns and objects and adjectives, but no verbs. They sent the Ebens a page of typed English lessons in a set of 1-sheet formats. That sounds like Americans. They were able to use a communication device on the Eben ship. They claimed that it looked like a television set with a keypad, but the pad contained many different characters depending how long you held down on one key. They were able to transpose their English words into the second part of this device, which was similar to a fax machine. It took some time to perfect this, but it worked. 6 months later, we received a message in English. This time it was clearer, but not clear enough because the Ebens were confusing several different words and still failed to complete a proper sentence. In the briefings, Ronald Reagan actually jokes because everybody messes up English because every word means 2 things. Well, not every, but a very few. I mean, whatever. You know what I mean. I'm not a grammar teacher. This isn't about grammar. We're talking about aliens here. They provided us with an Eben alphabet with equivalent English letters, but our linguist had a real difficult time figuring this out. The Eben language in written form are simple characters and symbols, but our linguist had a difficult time comparing the 2 languages. Over the next 5 years, we were able to perfect this language somewhat, and the Ebens were able to better understand English. So I guess the messages continued for the next 5 years. However, trying to coordinate a date, time, and location for an Eben landing on Earth seemed impossible because the timelines were completely different. On planet Serpo, they have a 40-hour day where we have a 24-hour day, obviously. They have 2 suns. They can't really tell when it's night, and we have a rotating sun. Even though we understand their language, we could not understand their time and date system, and they couldn't understand ours. We sent them our Earth's rotation to try to explain to them our time, but they were never quite able to understand that, and they would send stuff to us, but we were never really able to understand theirs. So it was just kind of difficult to understand because we have no reference to their planet, and they have no reference to ours. Ebens did not explain any astronomical date of Serpo, so we sent pictures through their communication device of our planet, trying to annotate time, but received some very odd messages with basically big question marks. Since it was so hard to establish a location and time, they decided to set the meeting point at the crash site, since they were sure EBE-1 sent those coordinates prior to his death. They did find some star charts in both crashed spacecrafts. They explained these objects to be hard and figured out because they were located on a block that they later figured out went into a certain panel on the crashed crafts. These instruments, once the panel was in place, showed a star system. In fact, we were able to fit all of the boards into the panel and view many star systems. We gave these to astronomers to decipher the star systems, which didn't take long, but they also discovered some pretty intriguing spots on the star charts, which we concluded were those space tunnels that they were talking about and how they travel from one to the other that they claim to travel through. When comparing the star charts, they are not consecutive, but come from different parts of the galaxy. When EBE-1 was alive, he showed us 2 devices. Well, he showed us a lot, but the 2 that they covered in this briefing are here. The communication systems, what we talked about, the television set with the button keypad, and the energy device. The communication system would not work without this energy device. Before EBE-1 died, he created a strong bond with the military major who is his guardian. The two of them decided that one of the first messages needed to be a request for an exchange program between the two planets, the Ebens and our military personnel. The sixth message contained the landing coordinates that we eventually did use. Over the next couple of years, we exchanged information and received a message from the Ebens. They wanted to visit Earth, they wanted to retrieve their comrades' bodies, and they wanted to meet with Earthlings. That would be cool. They provided a time, date, and location. We figured they were continuing to visit Earth and had probably mapped it out for 2,000 years, right? After some time, we agreed to meet with the Ebens on Friday, April 24th, 1964, where the Ebens would land in New Mexico. They were smarter than us and able to interpret our language and time periods easier than we were theirs, so our communication and planning revolved around Earth time frame and seasons. We can understand basic words and symbols. They understood more about us and our language than we did theirs, probably because they've been following us for 2,000 years. I don't know. That could be it. We don't even know who they are. MJ-12, surprise, surprise, are the ones who met in secret to plan the event, and they get to do all the cool stuff. Decisions were made and changed many times. They had 25 months from the date of receiving the message to the date of arrival. Several months into the planning, President Kennedy decided to approve a plan to exchange a specialized military team with the Ebens. The Air Force was tasked to find these military members. The selection criteria went as followed. They must be military, single, with no children, and a career member. Dang it. They had to be trained in different skills. Dang it. They had to be orphans. Dang it. They must have proven to perform under pressure. Dang it. They say 12 of them are the members. Some say 16. Some people say that there was 2 women. Some say there were 4. Actually, in anonymous emails, he does say that there were 2. He actually claims to have trained them. But we are going to talk about the 12 because that is the confirmed 12. The 16 is a speculative thing, and the 4 were alternates. But they were all chosen, and shortly after this, the President Kennedy was killed. But President Johnson came in and he continued with the program, and when it came time for the meeting, the U.S. was ready. The landing occurred in New Mexico. They even had a hoax landing location in case the information was leaked. The landing occurred and President Johnson was able to meet with the Ebens, but they were not prepared for the exchange program. And then finally, in 1965, the Ebens landed in Nevada, where we exchanged 12 of our men for 3 of theirs, or in this briefing it says 1, but wherever you find your information, that's kind of why it's I think it's kind of iffy. Which frustrated President Reagan because it seemed unfair. He asked, was it their ambassador? I mean, were we getting their star athlete, a celebrity? Why were we getting 1 and they're getting 12? And the caretaker says, we just called him EBE2. He doesn't say much about it. He just says, oh, we just got him. And he was going to help us. Our team of 12 went to their planet for 13 years. They were supposed to be there for 10, but again, because they couldn't or struggled with time, which we'll get into as the series goes on, they ended up staying 3 extra years. In 1965, they left. 7 returned home in 1978. 2 of them died on the planet, and 2 of them decided to stay. Team member 308, Team Pilot 2, died of a pulmonary embolism on the way to planet Serpo. 11 of them arrived safely to the planet. And I'll go over in the next episode all of the crew members, their names, their numbers, different things like that. I mean, we won't go over their names because those haven't been disclosed, but their numbers. So that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Again, we were just going over some of the facts of, or shoot, I shouldn't say that. All right, so this is going to wrap up this episode. We were just going over some of the details around Project Serpo, but more importantly, Roswell, New Mexico, as it led up to Project Serpo. We talked about the Reagan briefings. We talked about the beginning of how Kenneth Arnold had seen the ship and how then that led to the crashes. We talked about how in the Reagan briefings, those crashes had led to us discovering an Eben. That Eben gave us information and put us into communication with their planet. Once we were in communication with our planet, we set up an exchange program. That exchange program had 12 individuals that were all selected to live on planet Serpo for 10 years, where we would get either 1 or 3 of theirs. In the next episode, we're going to go over the beginning of Project Serpo, their trip there, what it looked like on the first day, different things like that. I'm going to go into a lot more details of those incidences. So stick around for the next episode. I really appreciate you guys for subscribing and watching. I know I got a lot of views despite me not being consistent, but I'm going to be a lot more consistent because I have a lot more time on my hands. So I'm going to be producing a lot more videos. So stick around. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. Okay, I think you should check out my book. If you like this show or you like my research, I'm actually a very detailed writer as well. I've won a bunch of awards for writing, and I sell screenplays. I'm going to start making films. But yeah, anyway, the book is called The Tale of a Dreamer. It's like The Alchemist meets Dante's Inferno. It's about a man who's chasing greatness, goes through a really traumatic event and decides to pick up a horrible habit. In this, he is forced to go through the 9 layers of hell, which is based on Greek mythology, also based on psychology. And he's faced with his own personal hell, where he has to find himself to get back on path towards greatness. It's a really good read. It's a fantasy. It's a dark fantasy. It's very entertaining, and I hope to make it into an animation someday that is akin to Studio Ghibli, but we shall see. That's a pretty big aspiration. But check out this book. It's on Amazon. So I appreciate you guys. Thanks again for sticking around. I'm very grateful that you guys have watched any of my stuff, and I'm promised that I'll continue to post my videos. So thanks again. All right, peace.